The conversation that's taking place is that but for the 2012 presidential campaign, in which Governor Romney did not get a historically low share of the Hispanic vote, but close to it, 27%. But for the realities of that presidential campaign, we would not be having the serious progress toward immigration reform that we are, because there would not be the motivation of Republicans to figure out some way to crack that code. Would you accept that as a premise, or do you think that's not fair?
I think it's too pat in a sense. Yeah, I think immigration is part of the issue mix that Latinos take into consideration when casting a vote. I don't think it's the only one. I think if you look at the Latino community within the United States, we're interested in a broad range of issues.
Right.
But this one, I think, in a sense, because of the tone with which it has been discussed within the Republican Party, at times has driven a wedge between the Republican Party and the Latino community. In some respects, it may be a variation on theme of what we saw in the 60s as the Republican Party kind of drew wedges between the traditional conservative Democrat on certain social and cultural issues and moved them over to the party.
Right.
And so I think the kind of the reverse and the bad side of that. Yeah. But I think it's too facile, but it does contribute to the mindset of a Latino voter when they're going to cast a vote. If you feel as though you have had a finger pointed at you, I don't know if it was Ron or Ruben Navarreta's columns that says, you know, at some point I felt that finger was pointed at me, that there was no distinction made between the rights of citizens and the rights of people without documents that were simply brown folk.
Everybody was lumped in the same group.
And yeah, and that's when I think the Latino community started to look a bit differently at the party.
You accept that your party, and you've been a Republican for long enough, and in places where it was not cool to be Republican. Also, I mean, we talked about how you were the first, and the first you actually.
You put enough adjectives in front of anything, you're going to get first.
Well, but
first Latino Republican in South Texas over 6 feet.
You were elected. You were elected Cameron County judge as a Republican, though, back in 1988. You know,
right.
That's a long time ago, and you were in fact the first Hispanic Republican elected countywide. So you've been at this for a long time. You've watched the evolution of the relationship between the party and the Latino community. So I want to ask you, do you accept the generally accepted idea that your party has had a problem communicating adequately with the Latino community in the main over the last couple of years?
Oh yeah, you bet. But we started with some disadvantages. One is Texas, and I'm going to start with Texas and then build out. Sure. I mean, Texas since Reconstruction have been a traditionally Democratic state. And so people, Latino populations generally, will gravitate towards, I think, the party that is in power of making decisions. I don't think that's unique to the Latino community. And once having gravitated towards a party, there is a tendency to stay loyal to that party. There is a tendency to stay within that. I mean, habits, both good and bad, are bad to break, are difficult to break. And so I think we started with that kind of structural disadvantage as a party, building within a community that had already established some, long-standing patterns of voting within the Democrat primary and the Democrat, and for the Democrat. Molly Beth, am I getting this right? Democratic. I always drop that IC. Okay, the Democratic Party. And so we start with that. Second, I think that there was, and the Democratic Party did a very good job of framing issues in a way that were more attractive to the community. And then listen, you can't underestimate the power of controlling the courthouse. In many of the counties that where the community was largest, historically, it was border counties. Just as an aside, I mean, I guess 1994 was the first time I ventured out in a statewide race. And I remember, campaigning in, let's say, West Texas. You'd be in Midland or Odessa, and you'd look around, you do the typical classroom visit and talk about voting, what you're up to, and this sort of thing. 20–25% of the class might have been Latino. I'm like, my bet is if I went out there today, it'd be 45, 50, 60. My point is, that in those days, the Latino population was primarily concentrated in counties where the Democratic Party controlled the courthouse, controlled the patronage, controlled the access to, and so you started with those disadvantages. So that's where we started. We started with an uphill climb, and we didn't make it better in a couple of cycles where we talked about issues like immigration the way we did.
Well, and let's get to that. Senator Van de Putte of San Antonio, you know, Senator Van de Putte was here last week, and she talked about a problem that she perceived the Republicans having was targeting Latino voters and not Latinos, that it was too much of a political calculation to expand the ballot box and not the tent. In the way that issues were talked about last legislative session, voter ID, redistricting, sanctuary cities, that the way that the party talked about those issues may have seemed hostile or maybe unfriendly, to be nicer about it, to the community, that it wasn't simply the affirmative case that Democrats made to Latinos, but that it was almost a negative case that Republicans were making, whether they intended to or not.
Perhaps. Listen, the best politics, I think, for the Republican Party, for the Democratic Party at that rate, is one that promotes economic opportunity and jobs. And the closer the Latino population moves, and I think in Texas we're there in terms of being a majority-minority population is referred to simply a majority, the closer aligned this community's interests are with those that have generally been the topic of discussion and debates in the political arena. And so it's going to be taxes, it's going to be schools, it's going to be criminal justice, it's going to be those sorts of things that impact the ability of you to put a check in your own pocket.
So if you're now the chairman of the Republican Party of Texas, that would be your message to
I say talk broadly about issues that are about economic opportunity and do them with a sensitivity to the Latino populations. Look, let's take our lead from what we see in the business side, corporate America. You know, whether you're selling burgers or clothes or everything else, you are recognizing the power and weight of the Latino consumer. And you're not really saying that your products are different in some other way. You're just saying your products are different and better in a way that is understandable and relates to a different community.
Right.
I think that's what both parties need to do.
So the argument is, don't talk to Latinos as Latinos. Talk to Americans.
Talk to Latinos as consumers of political dialogue.
Right. And try to figure out what motivates them the way that you would motivate any other constituency. So if you're the campaign manager for a statewide candidate who happens to be Republican and Hispanic, you're George P. Bush's campaign manager.
That'd be nice. I'd rather be his fundraiser.
Well, he seems to be doing okay on his own.
That's what I'm saying. I think that's a sweeter job.
So you're the campaign manager for a statewide Republican who happens to be Latino. Do you say run a campaign that is expressly about expanding the tent, or just run the same, run a campaign that talks about issues more broadly across the spectrum?
If I'm counseling George P. Bush, I say keep doing what you're doing.
Yeah. Can you please ask him to talk to the press?
Yeah. Well, listen. Yeah. No, but look.
I figured I had my shot since.
No. I'll answer that question. Yeah. I think it's like anything else. He's out. He's getting comfortable. He's making his speeches. He's pressing the flesh. He's talking to people. There will be a time for press.
That's what he should. But that's what.
And that's exactly what he should be doing.
Right.
And if you look at how he's doing it, he is very comfortable being George P. Bush Latino, George P. Bush Republican, George P. Bush scion of. He's very comfortable with all these things that go into making up George P. Bush. And I think ultimately that's what people are going to look at. They're going to look at a Latino candidate who's genuine, sincere, he's authentic, and he's conservative. Right. And it's not going to be one that makes him attractive. It's going to be that whole sense. Look, authenticity, which is a much bandied about word, ultimately is about integrity. Integrity is being comfortable with who you are and having a sense of right and wrong. And that's what George P. Bush projects. Yeah. And that he does it in a way that is comfortable in all communities, I think ultimately is going to be why he's a very successful candidate.
Are having candidates who happen to be Hispanic running as Republicans, is that an important way for Republicans to crack the code here? There's been a lot of discussion over the years of whether that's been an obstacle. I mean, you were succeeded on the Railroad Commission by Victor Carrillo, who very famously lost a primary to an Anglo candidate and then complained afterwards that he believed his surname was the reason that he lost. So are Latino candidates running as Republicans an issue, or do we tend to make too much of the ethnicity of candidates in your party?
You're talking to a guy that got his thing handed to him on a platter in 1994. I finished fourth in a fourth-person primary, and it would have been easy to say that. But I think the truth of the matter was that I didn't raise enough money, and I probably didn't work hard enough, and I didn't start early enough. I don't know if that was the case with Victor, but I don't think that was the disqualifier. And I do think it's helpful for the party to have Latino candidates, and I don't think that it is a disqualifier in Republican primary voters' minds that that's the case.
Well, Ted Cruz has disproved that theory in any case.
He has disproved that, and so I think, you know, that's part of the, people would like you to believe that, but I don't think it's a disqualifier within the Republican Party to be Latino at all. In fact, quite the contrary. I think that if you look at the size and the growth in the party, it's increasingly reflective of where Texas is on issues. Texas is a pretty conservative state. Listen, if you're, I don't care how much money you have or how articulate you are. If you're, let's say, a liberal Latino in the Republican primary, you're not going to win. I mean, voters can figure these things out, and I don't think they disqualify based on it.
Based on it.